What do you think, Art?
So far, so good.
You think we'll ever get it back together again? So my good buddy Art Carlson bought this drone for 60 bucks at a police auction, and he sent it to me to see if we could figure out what in the world he bought, whether it was worth anything, and whether we could actually make the thing fly. So during my FPV workshop live stream, I took it all apart, checked it all out, and the rest is history. This is what happened the following day, and if you stick around to the end, we'll see if this thing actually flew or not. Okay, after the live stream was over, and I had taken the drone all apart, the following day I tore into it. I found out exactly what flight controller board it was, and the name of the target, the Omnibus F4 Pro, gave me all the information I needed, and I was able to go on the internet, get all the information I needed on the board, some wiring diagrams and everything, and get it all figured out. I removed all of the plugs that were soldered into the board for the servo connections and all those wires that were hanging out everywhere, and just got rid of all that stuff. And what I ended up with was a board that looked more like the controllers I was used to working with, and I mounted it back in the quad in the proper direction with the USB port here on the side, and I went ahead and installed a little camera that I had, hardwired and soldered all that to the board. I did install the VTX, and it goes underneath the top plate here and the antenna right here. So we can put an antenna on it, and I put a little camera in right there. I did take and remount all the motors, took them off, and re-screwed all of them in with Loctite to make sure that they stayed in place, tightened up all the rest of the screws on the frame, put a nice brand new set of props on it, and mounted the receiver down in between the flight stack and the ESC, and ran the receiver antennas out the sides and shrink wrapped them to some tie wraps here on both the legs. So this thing is ready to do a final checkout on Betaflight and make sure that everything is set properly, and then we will go and test fly it and see if we actually took this police auction drone that Art bought, mystery drone, and actually turned it into a viable, flyable drone. All right, there it is, all buttoned up, ready to go. And now I'm going to go ahead and plug it into Betaflight, into the computer, and we will see, make sure that everything I set up during the assembly phase of this thing is correct and ready to go fly. Okay, the drone is hooked up to Betaflight, and the first thing I want to check is to make sure that front is front and back is back. So I'm going to lift the nose of the quad up, and that looks right, and tilt it to the right, left, yaw it to the left and the right. So that's proof that the flight controller board is set in and oriented correctly, and it knows where the front of the drone is. The next thing I want to do is check to make sure I have the ports set correctly, and It shows me that the receiver is on UART 1. On UART 3, I've got the VTX Smart Audio. In this case, it's IRC Tramp protocol, and that's set up, so those things are okay. In the configuration tab, I've got the ESC protocol set, the PID loop frequencies are set. It does have a barometer in it. Made sure the arming angle was set to 180, and you want to do that always because you might want to arm the thing when it's upside down stuck in a tree. Gave it the name ARTCO, and going down here it's a serial-based receiver. It's the FrSky RSXR and S-Bus protocol. That's all correct. Beepers are set, and that's it for the configuration page. Everything looks fine there. On PID tuning, I left everything exactly stock. The PIDs are stock, Betaflight 4.1.1. The rate profile is set stock, and left the filter settings stock. The receiver, I've already hooked that up and tested it, and it works fine, and everything is working the way it's supposed to. On the modes tab, I have arming on aux 1. I have the mode switch is aux 2, and that controls, in this position, the angle mode. In the center position of the switch, it's in horizon mode. In the third position of the switch, it's not calling for any of these other modes, and it defaults to acro mode. And in acro mode, I want air mode enabled. So down here where it says air mode, I've got that on aux 2, which is the same mode switch. So when aux 2 is all the way up and it's in acro mode, it will turn on air mode, which basically keeps the props above stop when you've pulled completely back on the throttle, so that the quad doesn't fall out of the sky. I've got turtle mode, or flip over after crash, on aux 5, and the beeper on the momentary switch on aux 3. So the modes look like they're set up right, and the on-screen display, I've got the altitude up here because it's got the barometer, the warning messages here in the center. It's got my average cell voltage here, the flying mode, stabilized horizon or acro mode, the craft name, ARTCO, the VTX frequency and power setting will show up in the on-screen display. A timer for the flight will show up, and also the RSSI, which tells me how strong the radio signal is getting from my transmitter to the drone. So that's all set up. In the VTX tab, I've loaded a VTX table that is compatible with the IRC Tramp protocol, so that the flight controller can change channels and power settings on the VTX. And that's all in, and I tested that, and that's working fine. So that is the Betaflight setup, and it looks like this thing is ready to test fly. We'll do that in the morning. Well, this is the big day here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go out and check and see if this thing will fly. So the first thing I need to do is tighten up the propellers. And okay. There we go, and we're going to put the battery in it. I did put a piece of sticky rubber down here to keep the battery off of the screws, and that keeps the battery from moving around. That stuff is really good to have on a quad. So let's strap the battery in nice and tight. That's good. And I'm just going to use this little dipole antenna right now, since that's what I had laying around, and I'm not going to be flying this FPV, but let's go see what happens. And we're also going to take this little ground station outside with us, so I can see and record what the camera is putting out. We're going to set this thing, as usual, a little far away from myself when I first try a new quad. So we'll set this down, and we'll get the ground station turned on so I can see what I've got. I will turn on my transmitter, and we will plug in the drone and set it down right here. And I do have a picture and an OSD, so let's back up a little bit here. And we'll see what happens. Okay, I'm in stabilized mode. Arm the quad. Whoa, look at that. Oh, Art, your quad flies. Look at that. How about that? It's kind of strange with that antenna sticking up on it, but on 3S. Well, Art, it's got enough power to get you in trouble, that's for sure. Hands off. Needs a little bit of right accelerometer trim, but other than that, it's flying very nicely. All right, this is fun. Okay, it works. What do you think of that? Try to get it back on the landing pad here. Wind's starting to kick up a little bit. Ah, close enough. All right. Art Carlson. Who'd ever thought that this little puppy would actually fly?
Telemetry lost.
Good deal.
I think that's about as good as it'll get.
Okay.
All right, now where did I put? Okay,
Now, where's the controller?
right in front of me. I got it.
And
All right.
where's the drone? All right, see if you can fly it under the legs of the piano.
Okay.